Excavations are taking place on a property in Genoa, Nebraska, that used to be the site of a Native American boarding school. It was called an industrial school, and it's thought that this is a cemetery, unmarked, where they're going to find the remains of Native American kids that died at the school over 100 years ago. And the way this came about, the deciding of where to excavate, was that they had cadaver dogs out there last year that hit on this area. And that's a 100-year-old scent. And they hit on the area, and then after that, people with a ground penetrating radar were out there and mapped out the area as well, and they have identified areas that they believe are grave sites. And this is the second day that archaeologists are on site working on excavating, and of course they're slowly going down through the layers. They haven't found anything as yet, but I just thought I'd bring this up due to a couple of reasons, and one of them being the dogs hitting on cadaverine scent, 100 years old. And yet in Salida, the dogs have barely been out there looking for Suzanne, and law enforcement didn't follow up on a lot of the stuff that the dogs did hit on. And I think that's a true disservice to Suzanne. And I feel that dog teams should be brought out, and should have been brought out already. But I think dog teams need to be brought out and check out various areas. There are several areas of interest due to the GPS or what have you of Barry's bobcat and such. There are places that need to be checked out. And there are things that the dogs did hit on back in the early days of the case. The dogs, the cadaver dogs, scented something on Barry's bobcat, and they scented something on the trailer, the dirt of the that the bobcat rode on. And where did that dirt come from? Why did it have cadaverine in it? And if we're going to find Suzanne, law enforcement needs to follow up, and we need cadaver dogs out there. We need to check out all the different possibilities, and there are seriously good leads as to where Suzanne's remains are. And, that information has all been made available to law enforcement. I know the people who have gone over all of the GPS and stuff like that. They know the locations that Barry was at that week that Suzanne was reported missing. They know where he was, and I don't believe that any of that area has been checked, and I don't believe that the cadaver dogs have been out there. I do know that there were areas that the cadaver dogs hit on that Barry had been, and just because Suzanne wasn't there in those spots when law enforcement excavated them, that doesn't mean that she had never been there, and that doesn't mean that something that had come in contact with her remains hadn't been there. I fully believe that this is evidence of Suzanne's cadaverine, and it's been spread due to the use of the equipment. And one thing that is really bothering me is those shovels that Barry left behind at the hotel. By doing that, leaving the shovels behind for his crew, he managed to not have the shovels on him when he went back to the property to work with law enforcement because of his missing wife that went missing on a bike ride. So he didn't have the shovels with him. And when his truck was taken, it didn't have the shovels in it. And when they searched the property, the shovels weren't there. He left the shovels at the hotel in Broomfield, and then his crew used those shovels as well on the wall in Broomfield. And then what happened to the shovels? Who has those shovels? I seriously doubt that they've been taken in and tested, and I would really like to know what happened to those shovels, and whether they've ever been tested, whether they've been sniffed out by dogs or anything like that. Let me know what you think in the comments, and prayers to the families of the children that went missing at this industrial school. And I'd like to also acknowledge the fact that there were over 500 Native American boarding schools in the U.S. and Canada, and that many students never made it home. They were placed in unmarked graves. The motto was kill the Indian, save the man. And, you know, some kids died from disease, some from abuse, and some even got shot because of trying to run away from the school to go back home. This was a dark blot on the history of the United States and Canada, and needs to be acknowledged. And I'm praying that the students' remains can be found and returned to their families. And some people have asked me whether they would know what tribe through doing DNA, and that's something I need to address to let you know, because a lot of people aren't understanding what indigenous people are. There are over 600 indigenous tribes, the peoples that inhabited North America before colonization, and we all have similar DNA. So like if you do a 23andMe or anything like that, it'll show that the area you're native to or you're indigenous to, what your genetic background is North America, but it can't really discern exactly what tribe you are unless, you know, you have other tribal members of that tribe to compare your DNA to find out if you're related to them. But really, our genetic makeup is pretty much the same or very similar. So that's one of the reasons why I say that regardless of borders, indigenous people are indigenous people, and I'm not going to discern, you know, saying, oh, that person is of Mexican descent and that person is a native. I'll say that they are all native, that they are all indigenous people. Anyway, cadaver dogs can sniff out remains that are over 100 years old. Why aren't they being utilized to find Suzanne?